welcome to the 𝐼𝐚𝐢𝐥𝐲. I am your host, Christene Marie. Today is a little bit of a different dynamic. I've never done a show from the car, and I wanted to hop on here actually because I wanted to share something that happened earlier today that just, honestly, it really impacted me. And so I thought, what better thing than to just share it in real time and share it relatively just like in the moment, you know, rather than curating the show perfectly later on. And so I went to my grandma's along with my sisters and my mom. My grandparents are deeply, deeply spiritual. In fact, someone once said that we have like a spiritual legacy through them. And I really love that. Like, I think that I probably don't even realize the value, the true value. You know, I'll never know what it's like to not have that. And so I just am so grateful. I also know that with every legacy, there also is handed down certain things that maybe you want to move away from or change. So there's always a dance of the gratitude and the gratefulness, along with the realization that there are some things that need to be adjusted for our generation and the next one. And so to that point, we went over to my grandma's to actually pray. I don't think we've ever done this. We all got together because one of my sisters just felt really strongly like we need to pray for the holiday season. There's just been some things happening in the family and some things that just haven't felt very settled. And it's like, okay, we all need to be super united and so much on the same page. And we went to my grandma's, and my mom had the idea of praying for each one of us girls, like she and my grandma. So the girls sat on the couch with both of them on either side. And so they prayed for all three of my sisters, and then I sat down and they started praying for me, and there was this really beautiful moment that I've never experienced before with my grandma. My grandma's 6'3", 6'4". She's tall and big, not big by any means other than she's just a big woman. So I had this moment with her that was just filled with so much tenderness. And she put her arm around me, and then she held my hand, and then she like leaned over and put her head on my head, and you know, I leaned in, and then she like almost like moved her head behind mine, and I like leaned in on her opposite shoulder. So I was like leaning in, and I felt so held. I felt this sense of like tenderness. Like I actually made the conscious decision in that moment to almost like take a breath out, like release a breath of just and settling into her embrace. And there's a big difference between having an experience where we're being held by someone in a romantic sense, like with boyfriend or girlfriend, versus almost like a paternal or maternal figure, where you feel like almost like a kid again, like just this sense of childlikeness, this sense of love and care and comfort. There was just a real tenderness there, and as I was leaving, I just felt so touched, and I still do. I feel just kind of amazed, like, oh my gosh, there's so much that I just experienced that I don't think I've ever experienced in my life before. I grew up feeling so loved, but that element of like leaning into the embrace and letting myself really rest in it. For so much of my life, I've just focused on being the one to give that rather than allowing myself to receive it. And I don't really remember if there have been times in the past that it's been offered to me and I've said no. But what I do realize here and now, I'm like, man, I need to actually intentionally pursue that, because I actually think I need that. Where I felt so much tenderness, so much care, and I've never experienced that ever, you know? Like, it's hard to describe. So it makes me question, how many times has that realistically been offered that I, because of my view and judgment over receiving that, have I actually not been able to be in a position to receive? Which makes me question then, when I am trying to give that to somebody else, am I, like, what's my why? And even as I sit with this right now and just kind of muse in real time, you know, am I actually able to give freely if it's not something that I have to give? Because what we receive, I love looking up the epistemology, I think that's the right word, the epistemology of a word, and tracing the roots down to the origin. So a year ago, I was looking into receive, because receiving has always been something really hard for me. You know, I'd much rather, there's actually like safety in giving, and I'll get to why in a moment. But with receiving, I've just really been trying to work on that. And so I looked up the Greek root word of receive is lambano. And lambano, what it means is that it's very active. You know, I always viewed receiving as kind of something passive, like you're just sitting there and somebody hands something to you and now you have it. But what lambano means is that it's actually kind of this cyclical element of like the receiving is actually just the input. The other half of receiving is the output. So lambano is actually very action oriented. It's almost like until you give it out and release it out, and that what you had and received is actually a true output in your life. That's, you haven't completed the receiving cycle. So think of it as person in the military receives a command from their captain or higher up. They have actually not received the command until they take action on it. And so that's the example associated with what lambano means. So if we truly receive love, that means that we're naturally going to have our output be love. So if we're seeing outputs in our lives that we don't like, or that are not in alignment with our ideal, or maybe that our partner doesn't like, our kids don't like, our business partner don't like, our customers don't like, what is it then that's our input? So that then kind of comes full circle. So if what we give speaks to ultimately what we receive, then man, it is so incredibly important that we actually intentionally position ourselves to go and pursue receiving that which we want to give. And I've never thought of it this way. And so when it comes to, okay, well, why do I actually have a problem with receiving? You know, I've spoken to so many executives and so many entrepreneurs who do so well existing in life at that level of just constantly giving, but they do struggle with receiving. And there's a vulnerability in receiving. There's an element of, there's an element of receiving that if it's not going to be transactional and we're just going to kind of open our hands and receive whatever that person wants to give us, it removes the necessary step of doing. So if we're going to have love that's not transactional, but rather that's freely given and freely received, then what that means is that I have to actually believe that my being is worthy, that I don't have to do anything. Because real receivership isn't predicated on transaction. It's not predicated on what we do. So if we don't fundamentally believe in the worth and value of who we are, we actually are going to fundamentally be ill-equipped to receive that which we desperately need to live and love so well and be the people that we want to be. And so with this concept of receiving, man, I'm thinking about, one, I want to go back to my grandma's and just kind of position myself to receive more of that from her. That was so special. It was so special. It was so like life-giving. And then also with these other areas of my life that are my ideal, you know, I want to be emotionally intelligent. Well, am I positioning myself around other people that I can receive that from, that I can receive their wisdom, that I can receive what they have to offer me? And then here's the beautiful thing. Never will it be one-sided. Never will it be without any kind of reciprocity, because the natural outpouring of receiving is giving that in return. And so maybe it doesn't look the same way. Maybe I'm actually not giving back to them, but maybe this is the concept of giving forward. It's that you're giving to me and it's flowing through me to the other person. Your love or your emotional intelligence is the input, and then I'm the output. So isn't that so cool? So really, man, if I'm unwilling to receive, I'm fundamentally slowing my own ability to grow. Because here's what's so interesting is that if that word receive truly is a vehicle, you know, it's like the input and then it's the output. I have to transform in the process, because if I've truly received it, then my output will be impacted and influenced by that which I received. So then that becomes the question of not just who am I intentionally pursuing for my inputs to receive from, but what inputs do I actually need to avoid? Y'all, I gotta tell you, this device, it is so important that we own that and we manage that and we take radical responsibility over our time, where we place our attention, how we're expending our energy, where our sources are that are feeding our inputs, that are being our inputs, and how much also. So that's number one, audit our inputs. But then we also need to audit how much of my ability to receive is predicated on transaction. What am I doing for you? Now, I actually do think it's very important that we have a semblance of, what do I want to say? I'm almost wondering if I want to go down this path. I think I'm going to wait on this, and maybe I'll cover it in another show. What are our inputs? Who are we intentionally going after to be an input in our lives? And then are we actually in mastery and in control of inputs in other areas of our lives that we need to monitor and say, no, I'm not going to let you come in, because it's a coming in. It informs our output. We're wondering why we're jealous. We're wondering why we're not grateful. We're wondering why we have big egos. We're wondering why we're constantly comparing. We're wondering why we're not happy. We're wondering why we're in an age of depression when we're more connected than we ever have been. Maybe there's an element of disconnection from the external and more connection on the internal that needs to take place. And I'm not just talking about just our connection with you and me, but like our connection with our nucleus. Thanksgiving is coming up, Christmas is coming up, and where are the people and the relationships that are actually critically important for us to nurture and continue developing, that are feeding us, that are like my grandma. Frankly, I'm so grateful for today. I'm so grateful for today. I'm so grateful that I opened up. You know, there's an opening to receive. We must be open. You know, each one of my sisters sat in the middle of my grandma and my mom and you know, we're in a posture of receiving. But it was up to each one of us to the degree to which we would choose to receive. People can only give. We get to decide, am I going to receive? Just like how we were talking about choosing our inputs, we get to choose who we receive from. Y'all, I wonder, you know, as we think about Thanksgiving next week, who do we actually need to pursue with intention to receive from them? And then who do we actually need to be careful and wary of that we don't receive their inputs? There are people, for most of us in our families, depending on the size, there's usually one or two people that we should and should not receive inputs from. So it would be really wise for each one of us to consider who those people are that we should intentionally pursue and maybe have a boundary around just to protect us, because it's so critical. If we're surrounding ourselves with cousins who are constantly complaining or gossiping, that's going to inform our output. If we actually choose to sit at the feet of our grandparents and people that frankly might be overlooked, might not be as exciting, might not have as much to offer initially, but we sit at their feet and really are students and just receive, man, do they just want to give us a hug? When's the last time we let ourselves literally be like held? And maybe that's time too to start asking for it. Maybe it's time to actually start asking, hey, would you just, I think I need a little bit of love this season. And this is what love looks like. So with that, thank you so much for joining me, and I will see you tomorrow on